Hi, all. How you doing? This is Dan with COWA. Thanks for joining us. Um, Looking forward to doing our first webinar of the year for our education series. We've got Tim Urban. Tim, raise your hand. Our VP for Colorado Wireless on our board, and our guest this week is Jim Patterson. We'll do some intros here in a little bit. Um, as people start jumping on and looking forward. We've already got 30 on and we've got over 100 registered. So it looks like we'll have a good audience. So I'm going to start things off by respecting all your time because I know you guys are busy. So I'm going to get going right away. And as you guys all know, we depend heavily on sponsorships. We're 100% volunteer and funded by all of the great folks in our industry. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw out a big thank you to our sponsor. Let me pull it up here. And our sponsor for today's webinar is Rainmaker. And let me pull up, having a couple of technical glitches, pardon me. There we go. Let me share this. There. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So thank you to Rainmaker for being our sponsor today. Rainmaker is a service company that does engineering and architecture, and were formed in 1992. They have 10 offices across the country to support telecom and wireless projects all over the country. They do all engineering, structural, environmental, and regulatory services, and they perform that all in-house. They're licensed in 49 states and have 25 plus years of experience working with all the carriers on everything from new site builds, first-time installs, site mods, rooftops, small cells, and DAS. Locally, we have Paul Fanos, who serves as a committee member on COWA's board. So if you want to get a hold of anyone over there at Rainmaker, Paul's your man. You can see his contact info there. Give him a shout out, and a big thanks to Paul and the Rainmaker team for supporting us. So thank you guys for that. Much appreciated. As I mentioned, we've also got Tim Urban with us today, our VP. And Tim is going to kick things off for us by giving us a overview of how everything's going for the year and what we're looking at for 2021. So let me get your slides up here, Tim, and there you go. So take it away, Tim.
Thank you so much. Well, and again, thank you very much for everyone who's attending and the continued wonderful support we get from everybody in the industry. So we'll just keep on going here.
All right.
Okay. In our upcoming events for the year, last year we were lucky and were able to do our golf outing, though it was somewhat abbreviated. We did clay shooting, and we plan to do both again this year. Some of the others, we're not sure exactly how that's going to go, guys, but we're going to do our best to get as many of these in as we can. We typically have a member appreciation during the year, and we've gone to baseball games and had a great time with everybody. Wireless West is also one of the events that we support. We're not really super sure whether that's going to happen on time or virtually. Last year it was virtual. I think probably a good chance it's going to be virtual again, but we're waiting for an update on that. And then we do a charity event. Each year we've done many different things, building bicycles and supporting Habitat for Humanity and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So we just love helping everybody. In the educational webinars, we are going to, I think Dan's got control of all that, but I think we're going at least through the summertime, hopefully longer. We'll do what we can to keep everybody up informed in what's going on with the world.
Awesome.
Okay, so Karen, you see a little name there, Karen, who is our Karen kind of takes care of everybody. Karen Clark is a special human being. She knows everything about everybody. And she's been doing a great job over the last couple of years selling sponsorships. This year we've got a couple of premium sponsorships. And as you can see, each one is $8,000, and it makes you the presenting sponsor for either golf or the clay shooting. And education, not part of that, but each one gets a kind of a premier position, and this other person gets the secondary position. So we do a lot of logos and recognition on the website all year long for those who have sponsored. Includes opportunities to do marketing emails with us, promotional white papers, and we share our annual results without identities, but we show what our group wants to have happen and how we're supposed to operate. We really try hard to pay attention to exactly what they want to do. And we have 2 partner annual sponsorships. Those are $5,000 each. And that gets you first choice as non-presenting sponsor at clay or golf. And again, more logo and recognition all through the year for your company, and gets you really in first place to get the mind share of the community that we have. And then additional emails and white papers that can be sent out on your behalf during the year. So it's really a pretty good deal. We had a lot of great response for that last year, and I think we sold that out pretty quickly, if I remember correctly. So anyways, so the next thing there. So you can see this is we have a lot of people, a lot of volunteers that do a lot of things through the year. We have a monthly meeting, and we try to make this as fun and interactive and educational as we can with our group. And as you can see, there's a lot of people here that you see Karen Clark a lot. So she's a busy girl. We do have 2 positions that we're looking for. One is a webmaster and one is a graphic designer. If someone knows someone that they think is a great in that position, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think. But as you can, in today's digital world, we need a lot of help with our web and with our designer stuff. So we would love to hear from you. We also need a little help with an event coordinator, but if you love to do that stuff, let us know, and we'll gladly warmingly bring you into our group. So anyways, what do we got next there? This year we gave away a lot of money thanks to you guys and gals. We're just so proud of what we could do here. This is Chris Ecton, who's our charity guy, and he gave away $15,000 to the Denver STEM Mathematics and Science Leadership Academy, which was a pretty big bump over previous year. They were very excited to get more dough from us. And then I think the next one we have the Denver Rescue Mission. Here's Chris with Lizette giving away $12,500. And again, that's really from all of y'all's hard work and participation in this and helping us raise funds. And then I think additionally we have we gave money to our Family Foundation, $7,500, and to the Warriors for Wireless we gave an additional $5,000. So really that thanks is to everyone who participated. I can't say that enough and as many times as I can, because it's really you guys. So
awesome. Thank you, Tim.
Welcome.
Great update. With that, I'd like to introduce Jim Patterson. Jim is the CEO of Patterson Advisory Group. It's a consultancy focused on startups and start-ins. He's worked with more than 25 new ventures since 2012. And for the last 3 years, he's been helping ACN build and grow MVNOs across the globe. Prior to Patterson Advisory Group, he had his own startup called Mobile Symmetry that focused on providing identity for incoming calls and text messages. In 2011, this company was purchased by the large Indian conglomerate called Reliance Infotel. Prior to Mobile Symmetry, Jim had a 15-year career at Sprint, where he left as Sprint's president of the wholesale division, covering MVNOs, machine-to-machine, and traditional wholesale services, as well as telephony solutions for the cable companies. Jim has served on a lot of industry, company, and civic boards, and ultimately he has 3 loves. His Martha, his wife of 24 years, who's also his in-house counsel, apparently. The Sunday Brief, the Sunday Brief, a weekly blog of the telecommunications industry, which if you guys are not subscribed, I highly recommend, and we'll have a follow-up email after this to tell you how you can do that. And Davidson College, his alma mater. So with that, Jim, love to kick it off to you and let you tell us what's going on.
So last year, almost to the day, as Amazon Photos reminds me, I was there in Denver with many of you, and got to lead off a very good discussion and got to meet many of you there. So thanks for inviting me back. It's great to be here. What I thought I'd do is do a little bit, obviously an update of kind of where we are as an industry, and then talk about 3 key trends.
Hey, and Jim, real quick before I forget, sorry to cut you off, but I don't want to lose your momentum later. If you guys have questions as we're going through, look on the bottom of your screen, click on the Q&A, type your questions in there. You should be able to see other people's questions. You can upvote their questions if you want. And when we get to the Q&A, I'll get those questions to Jim so we get them answered. So apologies for the interruption, Jim, but I want to make sure we got that in.
No, that's great. That's great. And keep the questions coming. Last year, I took a little more time than I probably should have. We didn't have enough time for questions. So that was feedback. And this year, I cut my slides down, and hopefully I'll be able to keep it brief. Anyway, it was great to see many of you in Denver, and I hope next year, if Dan allows me to come back, that I'll get to see many of you guys. It's a great place for me. We have a place in Fraser. We love out skiing out there and spending summers out there, frankly, as well. So it's a near and dear place to me. So I love to spend time there. What I thought we'd do is we talk a little bit about, if many of you guys remember from last year's presentation, we talked about where gains are being made. And I like to use 2 groups to talk about 2 different industries. One is a group of high flying stocks that we all know about. Sometimes they're called FANG. I don't include Netflix in this analysis, but I do a Microsoft, because as we'll talk about, Microsoft's pretty important to the telecom industry and became even more important in 2020. And we'll compare that on the next slide to the top 5 market capitalizations for telcos. So this was a unprecedented year in many regards, and in terms of value creation for these 5 companies, it was no exception. As of the end of December, the 5 companies there on the page are worth about $7.5 trillion. So it's a pretty eye-opening, jaw-dropping, whatever you want to call it, moment. They added about $2.6 trillion in market capitalization over the 12 months. So, and they added it for different reasons, right? So not every company here was favorably impacted by COVID. Obviously, if you're in the advertising business, even if you're online advertising, many of those restaurants or theaters or entertainment, tourism attractions, whatever, just aren't advertising if they're not open. So Google and Facebook, had some near-term corrections, but really what you were able to see is each of these companies. I mean, when your worst company in this list is gaining, I don't know, what is it, 28%? I think was the worst, and that's Google. Then you've as a group, you're doing something right. So Apple and Microsoft. So part of what I look at as an industry analyst is kind of say, how are they gaining value? Are they gaining value because they bought back some shares and maybe their equity price went up a little bit more than that? So we look a lot at kind of what's going on with share buybacks. There weren't many last year, but Apple bought back a fair amount, as did Microsoft. So they, each of those kind of had some stuff, had some other activities going on to improve their overall capitalization. For those of you who read the Sunday Brief, you'll know that I talk a lot about and this is a good contrast actually between what we call the Fab Five and the telco top 5. The 5 stocks you look here, just to give you context, at the end of September, because we don't have the end of December results yet, they had almost $600 billion in cash on hand, and that's and they have about $225 of debt, $225 billion of debt. So they've got a lot more cash than debt between the 5 of them. And I use Apple. Apple has about 80 billion more cash than debt, so that'll fund a lot of iPhones, a lot of inventory management, a lot of logistics. But Google actually has more than Apple. Google keeps about a cool $110 billion of cash, net, what we call net debt. on their books. And they still did fine as a stock. As we said before, advertising sensitive stocks, they weren't the big winners, but we all understand why Amazon was successful because we all ordered from Amazon. I think most people understand why Apple was successful. Let's not forget, right after COVID hit and right after we were all shut down, Apple actually had an announcement. I don't know if y'all remember this, but they announced an LTE phone, not a 5G phone, called what was it? The Apple. It's a lower end phone. It was a $399 phone, but it had great LTE capabilities. So they sold Apple SE, iPhone SE, and they announced that phone, and it was a raging success even during the middle of that pandemic. For those of you who don't follow the Sunday Brief, I would urge you to log in if you're interested in understanding when you will actually be able to get an iPhone 12 Pro in gold, because you're going to be waiting probably until I don't know which, maybe we'll all get vaccinations before the iPhone 12 is available, Pro is available in gold. I'm not quite sure, but it's kind of a black eye on the company. No one really talks about it, but it's been really, that particular model has been a real tough hit for them. In the telco space, and I think most of you guys remember this, but I'll remind you if it didn't. One happened in late March and the other happened in May. Microsoft got into the telco game. If they weren't already big with Azure as a whole, they got into the telco game in a big way with the purchase of Affirmed and Metaswitch. So for those of us who, and I know both these companies pretty well, Affirmed does a lot of what we call RAN management, and Metaswitch is what I call a core operating system, kind of operating in a new Open RAN environment. They're both just I think we would both say they're leaders in the space. They're not fly by night companies, and Microsoft's purchase of that subsequently resulted in them doing a pretty big announcement at the end of September. Again, many of us were doing other things, but I was watching this one pretty intently. Microsoft announced an entire platform of telco solutions for carriers. So they're not going to be the next Ericsson tomorrow, but their ability to disrupt and to threaten a traditional operating system versus application, the different versions of the OSI stack, definitely exist. And Microsoft's got $100 billion of cash to put towards this to make it successful. So they're definitely, it's a big change that we had happen this past year. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that each of these companies, let's see, Google's being sued by states and by the DOJ. Amazon Facebook's also in the process of being sued, and Amazon's under EU scrutiny. So, with the size of the companies and legitimately some actions that were not so good, at least alleged actions that were not so good, they're under an increased amount of global scrutiny right now. So a little bit about them, and we'll contrast that right now with what we call the telco top 5. So to make it into the telco top 5, just to give you context, you need to have an equity value of 130 billion or higher. So many of you are going to say, "Where's Dish?" And well, Dish is substantially smaller than 132 billion in equity market capitalization. So they didn't quite make the list this year, but those that did, it was a pretty interesting year. Overall, it's kind of a story of haves and have-nots. Comcast, and many of you have them as your internet service provider if you live in Colorado. Comcast had a pretty dismal year until the fourth quarter. So as things started to, at least there was a kind of a recovery play. One of the key recovery stocks wasn't Norwegian Cruise Lines, or wasn't a hotel chain. It was actually Comcast, and Comcast went from losing 20, 30, 40 billion dollars last year to actually ending up closing up $34 billion. So they had a massive swing, and again, that's the recovery of NBC Universal, that's the recovery of theme parks and things like that. And what's important to understand, if you kind of take nothing away from this slide in particular, is each of these telcos makes money in fundamentally different ways. We used to look at companies like Charter or Time Warner Cable in the before they merged, or Comcast. We used to say, okay, they sell cable services, but each of these companies makes money and differentiates themselves in much different ways. The only two that are, quite frankly, that are close in comparability is Verizon and T-Mobile. So as more or less pure play wireless carriers, and I know that Verizon has a lot of landline facilities still with FiOS, but they're making a good chunk of their cash flows coming from wireless. So the telco top five actually added some equity value. They kind of spent most of the year kind of thinking about adding value, and quite frankly were negative, and then they turned positive when everybody figured out that people were going to actually want more broadband, and they were going to be using their wireless devices, especially in March and April. As a result, the value of the company, I think it's just important to keep in context, the value of the entire top five of the telco industry, equity market value of that is about half or a little less than half the value of Apple. So just give you some context. Leverage, so the indebtedness of these companies, like many companies we saw in the industry, even though the telco industry was doing pretty well, they still found a way to restructure their debt. They found a way to take on more debt. Many of you who follow the industry are following what's going on in the C-band auction. And we're getting some indications as to who's going to have to pony up for money, because they're starting to talk to their bankers and say, I got to go raise some money. So the big news this week was AT&T saying, we gotta pony up, we gotta raise at least $14 billion to pay for our share of the spectrum. T-Mobile also did a $3 billion offering, so we're kind of getting ideas as to who's got what. For those of you who follow it, we ended right around $81 billion before clearing costs and other costs today. So if you assume Verizon's got about half that, they're probably paying, we'll call it $45-50 billion, and between cable and dish, and we know AT&T is probably somewhere in the $15 to $20 billion range. So it's a big event. It's obviously going to be a big funding event for the industry. It's hard to remember, but if you remember my presentation last year, we talked quite a lot about T-Mobile and the approval of their merger, right? Which, if you were following it this time last year, it was 50-50 at best that it would get approved. In fact, most of the analysts were saying it wasn't going to get approved, and all of a sudden it changed and it got approved. And there has been no grass growing under those guys. So I'd love to have some dialogue with you guys for Q&A about kind of what you guys are seeing with T-Mobile and Sprint. I will tell you this: we got I deal a lot with access providers, and one of my access providers I work with got a kind of a mandate note from T-Mobile the other day saying that their minimum bandwidth they're going to have on any new sites going forward is 10 gig. So, they're getting very serious about kind of what's going on, and it's we're starting to see some more things happen, especially at the beginning of the year. As I said before, Comcast and AT&T were battered more so. AT&T for Warner Media, Comcast, as we said before, for NBC and NBC Universal. So Comcast did pretty well, and again, most of that recovery was due to just really, really good broadband numbers. As much as many of their customers hate them, they stick with them because there's not a, because the CenturyLink alternative in their market is probably not so good. So the other big story, and I wrote a lot on it. There's a whole section on kind of what actions were taken during COVID, emergency spectrum relief, and other things that went on. But the industry doesn't get enough credit for what they've done as far as accommodating people during the worst of it, during what I call March through July. It was a pretty, if you were working on the network operations side and having to work through some of those spectrum repointings, as we call them, it was pretty tight, and there was a lot going on. I will say also, just side note, that DSS did say Verizon. We can have a debate on the value of DSS, but they'd be in a fundamentally different position right now if it weren't for DSS. And we'll see some of the manifestation of that when they announce earnings, not next week, but the week after. For some reason, my technical difficulty here. Hold on one second. See if I can pull this up one more time. I'm going to kick off this next section talking about 3 key trends that we see in the industry. The first trend, and the one that's, really starting to happen, and this is a little bit outside of what many of you are doing, which is kind of supporting the operations of the business, but this is more about branding. And as you guys know, for many of you who've been involved in the industry, the brand police at AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, it's pretty sacred stuff, right? And you don't mix anything with your brand. You don't do anything that takes a risk with your brand. You spend hours and hours discussing any sort of brand messaging change, et cetera. So when a big brand messaging change happens, it's really, really big news. Seeing the star of Wonder Woman appearing in an AT&T store stage, whatever you want to call it, with Lily, and highlighting that, which I think was a pretty bold move. If you think about it, this is all obviously done before the movie was released. Was pretty big move for AT&T, and I wrote extensively about it a couple issues ago. And it's when AT&T is willing to risk their brand on the associated star content of HBO Max, that's a big deal. And AT&T is really, really leaning into the success of HBO Max. So it better be successful, otherwise AT&T is going to have some explaining to do to the analyst community. On top of that, though, in a fundamentally different strategy, different way of looking at the business, Verizon said, it's probably not worth us buying CBS or somebody else. We're gonna align with Disney Plus or Apple Music or Discovery Plus, which came later on in the year, and we're gonna position ourselves as being kind of the champions of bringing content to mobile devices. We can all argue over which strategy is better or worse, which one's going to work over the long term. I think you guys are aware, Netflix is spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 billion this year, just developing new content for Netflix. So the ante for AT&T to be in the content business is pretty high. It's not an insubstantial number, but in turn, if they're successful, they're going to earn some pretty decent cash flows. So Verizon took a much different stance, decided to take its excess cash and spend it, roll it back into their network, and down the road, to do, potentially some more spectrum purchases or some more acquisition. I put a note in here. I think it's good for you guys to kind of think through this. 50 million subscribers is now the new minimum threshold. So if you want to know what successful is, I didn't invent that, by the way. I picked that off of a couple of articles. But, you're kind of nothing unless you have 50 million subscribers. So Discovery Plus, right? That's their new bogey to hit. Disney was 77, 78 million subscribers as of the end of or they hit that somewhere in the fourth quarter. AT&T is still at 12, right? AT&T or HBO Max went from 8 to 12. And when you include HBO, they're getting closer to 50, but they're not quite there yet. And so we'll see that. On top of that, for those of you who follow T-Mobile, T-Mobile's making some pretty aggressive moves to kind of shore up its bundling capabilities against the cable industry. And T-Vision was rolled out here in the fall, October 1st, their home internet product, which is actually what I am broadcasting to you over. So we only have DSL and Charter, and Charter's up to $93 a month. Single play for high-speed internet. So we decided we give the T-Mobile home internet a spin, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But it's actually worked pretty well. So bundling is also good because it's going to drive up when you study what the folks talk about in the earnings release. To get the Discovery, you have to be on a certain level plan. To get HBO Max included, you have to be on the HBO or AT&T Elite plan. So, it's driving up ARPUs as well, but there are real costs that are associated with the increment in the ARPU. So when it's kind of in-house, that's one thing, for AT&T, but Verizon does have some real costs. They're obviously get a good discount because they bring tens of millions of customers to these platforms, but they still have a real cost for each subscriber that they acquire. That's the first trend. The first trend is the mixing of content, and specifically, kind of the sub thread on that is the way in which AT&T of all the carriers is going to exploit all of their stardom as quickly as possible to be able to. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry for that malfunction. It was either that or my battery was going to go off. So in trend 2, what you see is a lot more alternatives emerging to traditional broadband suppliers. So for those of you who live in a Verizon 5G ultra wideband area, the figure on your right, that's the pivotal Comware soft package that they offer today for their millimeter wave product, and that's it's doing okay. I wouldn't say it's gangbusters, but it's doing okay. T-Mobile and Verizon in turn also offers a 4G LTE product, and they actually offer it across over 1,000 zip codes. So it's Verizon's getting more serious about offering an alternative product. It's not marketed in stores as much as it's marketed online, but they are doing a better job of trying to market that to potential customers in those zip codes. And again, just so you guys understand, it's in the case of Verizon, it is truly a way to provide more revenue off underutilized plant backhaul, specifically in spectrum in more rural areas. That's how they're doing LTE home internet. The use of the 5G ultra wideband are in areas where they have deployed fiber for densification, and they've deployed a lot of capacity. So they're done a really good job from a product perspective of bringing out this ultra wideband product. So if any of you have that and could provide some additional comments in the Q&A or on the chat thing, I'd be real interested in it. But I have a client based in Houston, and we talked to about 150, 200 customers that have it there in Houston, and about 140 of them were happy with it. So I figured if you have a 95% happy ratio, that's a pretty good thing. So the T-Mobile is getting more serious though, and they've made some more bigger commitments about how they want to disrupt the traditional broadband, specifically cable suppliers as well as DSL. So they went down the LTE route starting in October. We don't know exactly how many customers they acquired, but they did pre-announce a fairly large amount. It was about 700,000 what we call non-phone net additions. Now, a lot of those would have been tablets and hotspots to support kids as the schools got shut down a second time. But I think, my prediction is we probably got about 150,000 net adds in the quarter just for a home internet product. And that would be significant if you just think about how many net adds that doesn't result in for Spectrum and for Comcast, or Cox as well. So it's a pretty interesting development. T-Mobile's not so, and also the important thing, we talked about T-Vision before. T-Mobile is not charging for hardware. They're $50. I think you still have to pay a little taxes and fees on that, but it's a very reasonably priced product, and it is very consistent in how it operates. So as I said, we have this LTE home internet product. It's we consistently get between 50 and 90 megabits per second. We run, it's just two of us in our household, so it's not as big a bandwidth needs as say a 5 or 6 person household, but it's going to find its niche. It's going to find its and it's a pretty big niche. It's probably 20 to 30% of the market. It would probably work for. T-Mobile also made a commitment, just so you know, that they're going to offer a 5G home internet product to 100 million homes by the end of 2022. They made that commitment in an analyst presentation a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago. So it's a pretty big deal, and how they tackle that and how they approach that. It's definitely not aimed at Verizon. It's definitely aimed at cable, and DSL for their 4G product. So it's a pretty big deal. Just as a converse, AT&T is going to be very focused on fiber to the home this year. I don't know what capital they'll have available to do fiber to the home this year. That'll be an interesting development to watch. But they have no plans to do anything like this home internet product or the Pivotal. At least they've announced nothing related to that. The third trend, and many of you are living this right now, if you're kind of working in this private LTE space and private 5G space. I'm not going to say that 2021 is the year of this transition, because I think this transition occurs slowly. It occurs over time, but you're starting to see much more blurring. The chart you see here, many of you have seen this. This is from Nokia. It's kind of their vision as to how public and private networks start to work together. And in case you haven't seen this chart, let me just take you through it. Basically what it says is anything that's self-contained, so a port, an airport, potentially even a large train station, anything else that's self-contained, you're gonna start to see more private networks appear. And again, understand, private networks doesn't mean all the other networks are gone. It just means the operation of that particular business or operation is not over a public network, not over a network that anybody could access, except for those who have the specific key to that spectrum. So Microsoft, Samsung, Amazon, there's a lot of money behind this. IBM, and this is a real coming together of a lot of different areas. The carriers are playing in this area, but not to the extent that you see the other parties that I just described. There's a lot of hardware that's starting to be deployed, and you're seeing it at what I would say are places where I don't think any of us would be surprised to see a private network. Many refineries have had private networks for quite some time, and they're upgrading those to 5G because of the ability to deploy so many more sensors and other things around that they couldn't do necessarily in 3G and 4G. Where you're going to see it really start to proliferate are in, operations such as you see here, very, very large factory campuses. And I was very, very skeptical of the hype, that's happened around 5G for business, as I like to call it. And I can tell you from the work we've seen in the fiber that one of my clients has seen provided in Texas, it's very much real. It requires, just so you know, it requires a lot of fiber at the end of the day. Those wireless connections are connecting straight to fiber. So it's a very low latency networks and some interesting things that are going on in that space. I think that's about all I'll say about this trend. We can talk about it more in the Q&A if that's okay. And I'm actually writing a little bit more about it in this week's Sunday brief. So glad to sit back. But the thing to take away from this, and I think it's not been marketed very effectively, is there's going to be a lot more activity in that center area. And I think there's going to be, as I say, smaller square foot solutions, smaller campus solutions really being applied by 2022. Let's go on to the last slide. Sorry, screen stuck again. Last slide just kind of goes through some kind of what's hot, what's not in the space, and let's go back here. And I kind of did this last year, and it got a lot of very positive comments. So I call this more the staying the same, changing, and resuming kind of slide. And there's a lot here, so I won't go through all the details. But and many of us are living this, right? So lots of streaming options, lots of working from home, lots of growth in symmetric bandwidth solutions, if available, where available. Lots of 5G hype. I call it marketing and overdrive, but I think really what it is a lot of hype. Lots of still, even though third quarter is a little weak, I think you'll see some pretty good cable and MVNO growth. But again, that's confined due to the economics they have today until they get more network deployed. Lots of T-Mobile net additions growth just in general. And again, their results that they pre-announced last week were quite strong. And then, still that movement to online. I think I would almost call that staying the same, and that we've all been ordering a lot online. And there's certain products, as we all know, that will go back to browsing and purchasing and truly shopping for in a physical environment. But many of these, won't come back. The things that are going to start to change, and this is where we get into it. We talk a little bit about content bundles. They're going to get more aggressive. They're going to be more important. The value propositions that's presented in that are going to be more attractive, and the high adoption will follow. Many of you are aware of kind of I call it the great American move that's going on out of certain population centers and into others. And a lot of people are saying they'll be moved back. My neighbor, who's kind of an old fifth generation North Carolinian, he'd like to see a few of those folks move back. He's kind of a curmudgeon, but it's Charlotte area is just growing like a weed right now, and you're going to see the home location, even though we may go into the office a few days more a week than we did in the second half of the year. You're going to see a lot more acceptance of the fact that they can live not quite anywhere, but they could live farther away as long as the bandwidth solutions are decent. You're going to see more growth in fixed wireless growth. We talked about a little bit about that, both in these 4G LTE solution, more rural areas as well as in these urban areas. Commercial private wireless, as we talked about already. Cable family plans are also going to be a big deal as they complete their build out in certain areas. It sounds like from my discussions with the cable guys that they'll do those deployments very late in the year, but in time to accommodate the next big iPhone release. This is the year, and I tell you, there's a lot of pressure on these guys as the year probably for T-Mobile for business, postpaid phone growth. They're being very selective in how they approach the market right now, but they're starting to get more aggressive in this area. And I think, this is no surprise to anybody. There'll be a lot less stores when all this is done. Some of that can be blamed on the Sprint T-Mobile merger. Others can be blamed on COVID, but there's less malls, so there's going to be at least less mall stores. A lot of the freestanding stores that were corporate owned might go over to agents, but there'll be some shift that's going on there. FTTH, just so you know, is fiber to the home. So I'm assuming that we'll start to resume to see more AT&T builds. I think, as most of you know, AT&T is selective in how they deployed fiber in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what their strategy is going forward. So with that, Dan, I tried to stay and give us at least 15 minutes for questions. What do you got?
All right, thanks, Jim. We have a question. It's actually a two-part question. It goes back to kind of the beginning of your presentation. This person asked, can you confirm that Fab 5 market lost equity in the past week? And if so, can you give some perspective on that?
Yeah, they did. I actually wrote about it, and you guys can, I post this at the beginning of each Sunday brief. They did. But relative to what they gained last year, I always look at this as if they gain 2.6 trillion in a year and they lose 19 million in the first week, they still got a lot of weeks they got to lose 19 million to equate what they've gained over the past 52 weeks. So yes, I think I'll give you some predictions. Again, I'm not a stock picker. I'm not a Wall Street analyst, but I'll give you some predictions. We sat through the first 8 weeks of last year. So before the worst of COVID hit, and if you guys remember, the markets really started to tank that last week of February, and that's when everything started to get jittery. And then March was just pretty rough. But telcos, both the Fab Five and the telcos, neither were in great shape. Both were down year to date after 8 weeks in the year, and it wasn't driven by the events of the last couple of trading sessions. We always go through this period. I don't know why it hits the markets, but specifically hits utilities, and to some extent momentum plays. But we always have this little Santa Claus rally at the end, and then we have what I call the buyer's regret, or the return to store return, so to speak, of those stocks a little bit in January. I think what you're going to see at the end of the day is each of these companies is extremely healthy. I think you're going to see Microsoft particularly have a good quarter. Our understanding, again, I work with Jeff Moore a lot at Wave 7 and some of the other guys. We're tracking very closely what's going on with Apple sales and what the effect. I didn't mention this in the recap of 2020, but what the effect of AT&T offering the same deal to their existing base as they did to new customers, what effect that had on total volume. But our view is it had a pretty big impact. And AT&T, at least through the first 8 or 9 weeks after launch, was having some issues with keeping up with iPhone orders. And you have to assume that they did a pretty good job of building inventory and doing a pretty good job of figuring out how many people would upgrade. So I think you're going to see I won't say a surprise from Apple, because all that could be offset by not hitting certain demand, say China or something else. But I think what you're going to see is Apple's probably going to come in a little stronger than folks think.
Great. That's good. Thanks. Next question. Do you have any predictions on the CapEx commitments for the carriers in 2021?
So I think AT&T announced they were going to be in that $18 to $20 billion range. I think Verizon, they'll announce something here in their earnings, but my guess is they're going to be kind of in the mid-teens. I don't think they're going to be topping out 20. Again, this is all pre C-band. But if you just think about it, AT&T's got a certain level that they've already committed for just work in process today, and then just maintenance contracts and other stuff. So there's not going to be some dramatic, slash. I think the question is, does it go from 19 to 18? And if so, what's impacted? I think my thought is wireless probably doesn't get impacted as much as something like out of region fiber deployments, or certain other projects that AT&T kind of had in their product development cadre. I don't think you're going to see something really dramatic and impacted. As you guys know, AT&T did a pretty good job of deploying FirstNet, at least in the areas where they are now. I don't think they'll slow that down. I think they want to kind of get that project done and get their final payment. So, any other questions, Dan? I don't know if you guys can hear me. I can't hear you, Dan. Sorry, you're on mute.
I was on mute. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
The question is, has COVID-19 changed carrier focus? For example, do you feel build plans shifted in a way in terms of rural build out and urban infill?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on the carrier, I think is a nice way of saying it. The comments that I've seen, and there was a city conference last week, and they were actually talking about the fact that they're not seeing all the urban infill needs today. They obviously see the need for that as we get through the second half of the year. But it's a hard balancing act, right? But they're still seeing a lot of people at home. Except in certain areas. Florida, obviously, their Florida build just keeps going and going. Same with most parts of Texas. No, is the answer to the question is I still think there's going to be more build, what I would say suburban, exurban, And there'll be a little bit of a swapping between rural and urban. I think with T-Mobile, we're just going to see more build because they have to meet the rural requirements for the FCC.
Great, thanks. Let's see, another question here is, let's see, with the carriers needing to hoard cash for the auction, and I think they're talking about the C-band auction that's wrapping up, how do you predict the telcos will spend on their network upgrades and build outs in 2021?
So I think that's if I were a regional fiber provider and I felt like maybe with enough money, Verizon could overbuild me. I don't feel threatened by that this year. So I think I maybe bought a year or 2 or 3, right? So Verizon's got to build up some cash flow to cover that cost of the C-band auction. My view is prices, just ARPUs in general, are gonna go up because of this bundling effect. And what you're gonna see is a little bit more cash flow start to accrue to the carriers as these bundled products helps to reduce churn and increase overall ARPU. So I think that's kind of a theme. That's not a wish list. I think that really is going to happen. But I don't think that's going to cover the cash. I think you're going to see some capital reductions on certain projects. A lot of people ask me, I get asked a lot about what's going to go on with Verizon's fiber plan, their what I call the densification plan in markets. I don't see that slowing down for the next, what I would say, anything that's in process, but I don't see massive, doubling down, so to speak, on that strategy in light of C-band. There just isn't enough money to go around. I'll be honest with you. And that's a tough thing because Verizon's left with, in many cases, a little bit built in this section of town, a little bit built in that section of town. So they got to get those connected at a minimum. They'll, probably the folks that are on this call know a little bit more about how that impacts something like a Denver build out. What I see in Houston, Atlanta, and I have clients in both those markets is if Verizon's build map is accurate, we snapshot each of those build maps for every city and have been doing that since May. So we have May through January 1st. And, there are certain markets that Verizon's just going to town. I mean, really going to town. And there are certain markets, certain areas of markets where there's just been literally no movement. And it's understandable, right? I'll use Houston because many of you guys know Houston. You're not the Astrodome, and that Astrodome complex. It's in the middle of southeast Houston. It's not an area where you're going to have a lot of high-end wireless subscribers. You'll have a few, but you're not going to have a ton. So that area, was built out for one reason and one reason only, and that was 5G venues. And I think Hans Vestberg talked about this a little bit at CES. I haven't read all his transcript, but he basically said, "Listen, we're building for the long term. I mean, what else do you say, right? When the venues aren't being used." So I think there may be some trimming back on Verizon's fiber spend. I don't think it's a 50% cut. I think it's kind of let's measure this out a little bit more because a lot of the capital is going to get subsumed and be a big check to the FCC for spectrum. And then also they'll want to clear and accelerate that clearing cost. So if they have half the clearing cost, that's another $6.5 billion that they'll have to shell out to this year and next year to be able to clear that spectrum.
So maybe we'll see the capital spend to put that spectrum to use more next year.
I think you'll see a little bit of each, right? So the A block, you're going to start to see some spending on that. I would say at least in the second half. But if you have B and C blocks, again, I don't know where Verizon will end up, but my guess is if there's a 10% split in the A block between the A and the B and Cs, and that looked like to be the numbers that I was looking at today in some markets. In some markets, it's flat. In some markets, you paid for all three right at the same time. It just doesn't look to me like it looks to me like they'd want to get that deployed as soon as they could.
Yeah. Next question, and this question is an interesting one that I think a lot of people that are attending could answer in one perspective, but I'll pose it as from the perspective of what the carriers have said in their earnings reports and the like. How did COVID-19 affect their small cell deployments this last year?
Yeah, I think anything involving municipal approvals was probably
Right.
was, well, we all know, we're all living it, right? It's getting anything approved through a municipality in a good year is hard. Last year, I'm sure it was brutal. I can't imagine what was going on. My guess is if you set an objective of 25,000 small cells this past year, you were kind of patting yourself on the back if you got maybe half of that deployed, right? And maybe the rest at least permitted by the end of the year and in process. That's my guess, is probably what you're going to be looking at.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work left to do on densification through small cells. A lot left in building too. In building got some traction, but it kind of shifted from what we call tall shinies or commercial office buildings into things like hospitals and to some extent campus environments at universities.
Yeah. Let's see, we're getting close, but we have time for a couple more. The next question is, what do you see as the biggest change or potential in the industry over the next 3 years? So a little longer view.
Well,
kind of putting you on the spot there a little bit.
That's a big macro question. I like those. I usually like those. I like those a lot. I'll say this. We haven't had to worry as much about the financial health of large companies. They're taking on a tremendous amount of debt right now. And in the case of Verizon AT&T, they have to kind of come to terms with paying out fairly large dividends. I think AT&T announced that their dividend payout would be somewhere around 60% of their operating cash flow. It just doesn't make any sense to accelerate or increase that. And AT&T did not increase their dividend in the fourth quarter, thankfully. Verizon's in a little bit different position. They've been been a little bit better about how they buy back shares. They didn't do any as we saw last year, but they're still facing very, very tough sledding. It's a capital intensive industry. You got to see increased cash flows from the capital that you deploy. That's the big thing. So I would say right now the question is, I'll tell you what you won't see. You won't see a lot of big M&A. You're not going to see another T-Mobile. I don't think you're going to see a cable plus wireless. We talked about that, I think, last year. I just don't think you're going to see a bunch of that. And I know a lot of other people do expect to see that, regardless of who's in charge in Washington, D.C. But I think it's going to be a lot tougher. I think as companies get bigger, I think it gets, that hurdle just gets ever higher. And you see things happen like you saw with MasterCard and Stripe, where they just decided it's not worth doing it. DOJ steps in and says, I'm going to make your life miserable for the next 24 months, and they're like, yeah, okay, let's not do it. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of M&A. I do think you're going to see, you got to get these networks deployed. I think I'll give you the one that I do think. I think that third trend, and I owe some more writing on that, and I'll be doing that in the brief. I do think how business looks at telco is going to change dramatically over the next 3 years, and I use that term not as some sort of random statement. I use that in the sense of Microsoft, and to some extent Amazon with AWS, controls a lot of the activities of the CIO in these corporations. They just do. And the CIO spending, as they've moved information to the cloud, as they deployed other software to help make businesses more productive, that's where their time and attention is going. That's, to use an old telco term, that's what CIOs most want to investigate. They don't really have as much, and it's not saying 5G is not attractive. They do want to investigate it, but it's not as attractive as the end-to-end solution. So networks in building 5G, private 5G, is going to become more important, but it's going to become more important because Microsoft, Amazon, and others are going to make it more important because their valuations ride on it.
Great. Well, listen, we're getting here at the end of the hour. We're almost right on time. So thanks for everyone participating. Before we go, I want to pump up our next session for February. It's scheduled for February 5th at 10 a.m. We get out a little earlier in the day since that's a Friday. And so 10 a.m. Mountain Time, Friday, February 5th, we will have Dr. Gemma Frock and Todd Schleckway from NATE. And they're going to be talking to us about workforce development, and specifically, NATE has some really big plans in the works for how they're going to try to do more outreach to community colleges, to the younger generation, to try to create more workers that want to come work in the wireless industry. So this should be a really good one. I know in our annual member survey, we had quite a few folks that answered and said that they want to hear more about workforce development and how we can get more people to work in the industry. So this should be right up that wheelhouse for those of you that are looking for that. So with that, I'll say thanks. Thank you for always, as always, Jim, for contributing your time. Thanks to everyone for participating and for supporting the organization. And again, thanks to Rainmaker for being the sponsor for today's event. So hope everyone has a great rest of the week and a great weekend. Thanks all.